Being a rock star is a surprising amount of work, and a lot of the play can be pretty dangerous too. So maybe it's not surprising that they often find themselves in serious trouble. Here are a few of the rock stars who have cheated death more than once. Most people take pretty good care of their bodies, and if they're lucky, their bodies take good care of them. Sadly, however, that's not always the case. Just ask Bret Michaels, lead singer of Poison. Not only has Michaels dealt with diabetes his entire life, but he was struck ill twice in 2010 and nearly died each time. First, Michaels came down with terrible stomach pain while on tour. When he broke out into a high fever, he was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed emergency surgery to remove his appendix. If he'd waited any longer, he might not have lived long enough to experience his second brush with death. Just a few weeks later, Michaels suffered a brain hemorrhage that required him to go into surgery again. The initial prognosis was pretty grim, but luckily he pulled through, and the Poison star is still going strong today. You might be forgiven for thinking that Keith Richards' brief encounters with death might have something to do with hard narcotics, but you'd be wrong. Well, this time at least. The Stones guitarist and legendary hard-partying rock star has indeed come close to death several times, but not necessarily because of substances. One instance that really stands out, for example, is when he was literally electrocuted on stage at Sacramento's Memorial Auditorium in 1965. A microphone stand wasn't properly grounded, and when Richards set his guitar against it, there was an explosion of sparks, and Richards was knocked off his feet. He was rushed to the hospital, where a doctor unhelpfully told everyone that they either wake up or they don't. Of course, that's not to say drugs aren't responsible for at least some of Richards' close calls.
He's the only man on the planet who can go, anthrax. All right.
Years later, for example, Richards found himself in Switzerland, doing drugs with a bunch of people, when someone slipped strychnine into his dope. Now, strychnine will definitely kill you if you take too much of it. And sure enough, Richards slipped into a coma. He claimed afterwards that he couldn't move or speak, but could hear everyone freaking out, mostly about having killed one of the most famous rock stars in the world. Jonathan Davis fronted one of the most innovative rock bands in history, Korn. Combining hip-hop, heavy metal, and a whole lot of attitude, the new metal sound that Korn helped to create and popularize changed rock music forever. But Davis's first brush with death came long before he took to the stage. As a child, Davis suffered from severe asthma, and he began cycling in and out of hospitals as a result. Davis is clear-eyed about his battle with the disease, once saying, "I was supposed to die." In fact, a really bad asthma attack when he was just 5 years old almost killed him. To this day, he often uses an oxygen tank during live performances. Davis's second brush with death happened in 2006. He began experiencing some horrifying symptoms, including severe bleeding from his gums and terrible bruising after taking an antibiotic while on tour. He made his way to a doctor in London who diagnosed him with a blood infection characterized by a dangerously low platelet level. Davis, who often headbangs on stage, could have easily caused himself a brain aneurysm as a result of the condition. It's not shocking to hear that Steven Tyler, the lead singer for legendary rock band Aerosmith, was a pretty heavy drug user in his time. Tyler himself estimates he spent tens of millions of dollars on illegal substances over the course of his life. He and his bandmates' drug habits almost ruined their careers too, leaving them basically unable to function by the early 1980s. Tyler and lead guitarist Joe Perry were known as the Toxic Twins, and their drug abuse very nearly consumed their lives. Sobriety and a good comeback eventually solidified Aerosmith's legacy, but Tyler isn't shy about the true cost of that rock and roll lifestyle. He once told Howard Stern that he died as a result of drug overdoses 3 or 4 times. During one of these brushes with death, Tyler turned blue, and his friends placed him in a tub of cold water to revive him. As Tyler told Stern, these experiences didn't scare him so much as convince him that there was an afterlife. Johnny Cash was a rebel his entire life. The Man in Black didn't do anything by half measures, whether it was his live performances, his drug abuse, or his brushes with death, which have to be some of the strangest in rock history. First, there was the time he nearly froze to death while sleeping indoors in his hotel room. This was during Johnny's pill-popping heyday in the 1960s. Stopping in Iowa one winter, Cash stripped down for bed, opened the windows, and then passed out on top of the covers. When he didn't answer his door, people broke into the room and found him cold as ice, nearly frozen to death. Later, in 1981, Cash had a second brush with death, this time involving an ostrich named Waldo. Cash kept a small zoo of exotic animals on his property in Tennessee, and a harsh winter had caused several ostriches to die, including Waldo's mate, who refused to go into the barn and subsequently froze to death. Afterward, Waldo attacked Cash and would have killed him if his metal belt buckle hadn't protected him from the worst. It might seem crazy until you remember that ostriches are actually the largest birds in the world and pretty strong as a result. Although attacks on humans are rare, if you ever see one giving you the stink eye, take a lesson from Johnny Cash and run. Death by shot put isn't a common cause of death in this world, especially not for rock stars. But Meat Loaf actually credits his career to almost being killed by a shot put that hit him in the head while he was in high school. The injury was near fatal, and almost certainly would have been if Meat Loaf hadn't been standing more than 60 feet away from the athlete who launched it. The singer claims he couldn't sing at all before the injury, but woke up afterward with the famous voice we all know and love. Being a fairly big man who always puts on energetic performances, there was always the chance something was going to go wrong on stage, and sure enough, in 2003, Meat Loaf almost collapsed during a performance. The singer actually suffered a heart attack right in the middle of his performance and had to be rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. The doctors discovered that he was suffering from Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, a heart condition that often shows no symptoms before prompting a heart attack. Meat Loaf didn't die that day, but he continues to have issues with his health, having now collapsed on stage during performances several times to date. When you think of rock stars putting themselves in harm's way, Ozzy Osbourne's name is probably one of the first that comes to mind. After all, he's not exactly known for his impulse control. But the first of Ozzy's brushes with death actually came as the result of an all-terrain vehicle incident. The singer was cruising around his property on a quad bike when he lost control and crashed, with the bike landing on top of him. He required emergency surgery after the accident, and Ozzy remained in a coma for 8 days. After surviving that horrific experience, Ozzy had a second close call in 2018 after getting a manicure. The singer contracted a bad infection after having his nails trimmed and getting a cut on his thumb, and after an emergency surgery, doctors told him that if the infection had spread to his blood, he would certainly have died. Who knew manicures were so rock and roll? Nikki Sixx is probably more famous as a rock star level party animal than he is as the bassist and main songwriter for the heavy metal band Motley Crue. And when you're known as the most dedicated partier and drug user in Motley Crue, of all bands, you know you got a problem. In fact, Sixx literally died in 1987 when he overdosed on heroin. He was dead for about 2 minutes before EMS workers revived him in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. Reportedly, it took 2 adrenaline shots to get his heart moving again.
Was that the end of your drug use?
I mean, that was the beginning of the end. It takes a while, and addiction's a really hard thing to kick.
And that was actually the second time Sixx had nearly succumbed to a drug overdose. His heroin habit was already well known by 1983, and at the end of a tour with Cheap Trick, Sixx found a drug dealer who helped him shoot up, and Sixx ended up collapsing. His heartbeat was so faint that the dealer assumed he was dead, and Sixx regained consciousness to find he was being carried to a dumpster for disposal. Alice Cooper isn't just a rock icon, he's also one of the most recognizable rock stars of all time. While he's not known as a particularly crazy party guy, however, that hasn't stopped him from nearly dying twice. Once when an elaborate stage act went terrifyingly wrong. In 1988, Cooper was on tour and designed a scene where he would appear to hang himself for shock value. Cooper consulted with the famous magician James Randi, to design a wire harness that would support his weight so he could safely mime the act. But Cooper skimped on maintenance. He used the rig over and over again until one night he put the rope over his head and the wire snapped. Cooper almost literally hanged himself on stage, but luckily the rope slipped and Cooper only blacked out and suffered a fall. More recently, the singer was involved in a head-on collision with another car in Arizona in 2018. Both vehicles were totaled, but miraculously, Cooper walked away without a scratch. Weirdly, the accident occurred just a few weeks after Cooper had experienced a false alarm nuclear attack alert while vacationing in Hawaii, and just before his birthday too. As the rocker quipped, "Somebody was trying to keep me from getting to 70. U2 were once the biggest band in the world, with a number of hit albums, humongous world tours, and huge chart-topping songs. But they were also consummate professionals, and you never heard much about any near-fatal escapades during their heyday. For lead singer Bono, that came much more recently. Bono was biking in New York City's Central Park in 2014 when he was involved in a high-speed crash with another bicyclist. The crash sent him to the hospital, where it was touch and go for a while. The New York Post speculates that U2's 2017 song, Lights of Home, in which Bono sings "I Should Be Dead," is actually about this accident. A few years after the bike crash, Bono announced that he'd almost died during the making of U2's album Songs of Experience. In a 2017 interview with Rolling Stone, the singer alluded to an extinction event for him that was physical, but refused to elaborate on the specifics of his health crisis. The success of any songwriter is usually down to their ability to channel their own experiences into their music. As such, Elton John is one of the most successful songwriters in rock history, and many of his greatest hits are known for exploring real emotional pain. That pain, in fact, once led John to attempt to take his own life. In 1975, John was riding the first wave of fame. He was a best-selling musician, he was world famous, and he was miserable too. He hosted a party at his home, and then suddenly walked out to the pool area, announced he'd taken 85 Valiums, and dived into the water. He almost succeeded too. In the end, he had to be dragged out and his stomach had to be pumped. Over the years, the star found a measure of happiness and eventually became sober. But in 2017, death once again came looking for him when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. John subsequently underwent surgery to remove the cancer, which was successful. But then he suffered a post-surgery infection, which sent him back to the hospital and very nearly killed him. John says it took 7 weeks for him to recover from the infection. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255.